start by reading a script for remotely conducted open meetings. Confirming member access. As a preliminary matter, this is Peter Kaiser. Permit me to confirm that all members and persons anticipated on the agenda are present and can hear me. Members, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Richard Hussey.
Yes.
Peter McEachern.
Yes.
Jason Bridges.
Here.
I believe that is it for capital program committee members, unless I'm mistaken. Okay. Staff, when I call your name, please state your position and respond in the affirmative. Libby Gibson.
Libby Gibson, Town Manager, present.
Ryan Turbot.
Ryan Turbot, Finance Director, present.
Michael Kozort.
Michael Kozer, Superintendent of Schools, present.
Greg Tivnan.
Greg Chipman, Assistant Town Manager, present.
Rebecca Woodley Oliver.
Rebecca Woodley Oliver, Assistant Procurement Officer, present.
Rachel Day.
Rachel Day, Assistant Town Manager, present.
Alexandria Penta.
Alexandria Penta, Budget Analyst, present.
Diane O'Neill.
Diane O'Neill, Director of Facilities and Grounds, Nantucket Public Schools.
Was that okay, audio wise?
It's hard to hear you, Diane.
Diane O'Neill, try again.
Diane O'Neill, Director of Facilities and Grounds, Nantucket Public Schools.
Good enough.
Good enough. Okay. Karen McGonigal. I believe Karen's on mute.
Am I off mute now?
Yep, good now.
Okay, Karen McGonigal, Chief Technology Officer, present.
Beth Hallett.
Beth Hallett, Deputy Superintendent of Schools, present.
Rob McNeil.
Rob McNeil, Director of Public Works, present.
Okay, just looking back through. I think that covered everybody, but please speak up if you were not called. Okay, with no further staff to report. Moving on, anticipated speakers on the agenda, please respond in the affirmative. Pull the agenda. I believe we have Brian Turbot speaking on review of the fiscal year 2021 budget projections.
Present, Mr. Chairman.
Yep, okay, affirmative. All right, moving on, introduction to remote meeting. Good morning. This open meeting of the Capital Program Committee is being conducted remotely, consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of March 12, 2020, due to the current state of emergency in the Commonwealth due to the outbreak of the COVID-19 virus. In order to mitigate the transmission of the COVID-19 virus, we have been advised and directed by the Commonwealth to suspend public gatherings, and as such, the governor's order suspends the requirement of the open meeting law to have all meetings in a publicly accessible physical location. Further, all members of public bodies are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely. The order, which you can find posted with agenda materials for this meeting, allows public bodies to meet entirely remotely so long as reasonable public access is afforded so that the public can follow along with the deliberations of the meeting. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. This meeting will feature public comments. For this meeting, the Capital Program Committee is convening by video conference via the Zoom app as posted on the town's website, identifying how many public may join. For Zoom meetings, please note that this meeting is being recorded and that all attendees are participating by video conference. Accordingly, please be aware that other folks may be able to see you and to take care not to screen share your computer. Anything you may broadcast may be captured by the recording. Meeting materials. All supporting materials that have been provided members of this body are available on the town's website unless otherwise noted. The public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda unless I note otherwise. meeting business ground rules. We are now turning to the first item on the agenda. Before we do so, permit me to cover some ground rules for the effective and clear conduct of our business and to ensure accurate meeting minutes. I will introduce each speaker on the agenda. After they conclude their remarks, I will go down the line of members, inviting each by name to provide any comment, questions, or motions. Please hold until your name is called. Further, please remember to mute your phone or computer when you are not speaking. Please remember to speak clearly and in a way that helps generate accurate minutes. For any response, please wait until the chair yields the floor to you and state your name before speaking. Members wish to engage in a conversation with other members, please do so through the chair, taking care to identify yourself. After members have spoken, the chair will afford public comment as follows. The staff will activate the chat feature on YouTube. Members of the public who have comments or questions can use the feature to communicate with the public body. Instructions to do so are on the town's website. The chair and/or staff will do the best to address these public questions and comments. Finally, each vote taken in this meeting will be conducted by roll call votes. All right, that concludes the remote meeting script. Moving on to the agenda. Pull this up here. Let's see. I believe I need to get approval of the agenda. Can I get a motion to approve the agenda, please?
So move. Richard
moved.
Hussey.
Second.
Second, Peter McEachran.
Thank you, Peter. Okay, I guess I'm going to conduct a roll call vote to approve the agenda. Richard Hussey,
Yes.
Peter McEachran,
Yes.
and Jason Bridges.
Yes.
Okay, and I am a yes as well, if I can vote. So that is approved unanimously. Next up on the agenda, public comments. At this time, Alexandria or Jason, public comments? Nothing? Nada. Okay. I guess check back in if there are any that pop up, with respect to any topic that we're actually discussing. Otherwise, perhaps we'll check back in at the end on any general public comments. Next up on the agenda, I believe I will be handing the microphone over to Brian Turbett to start for the review of the fiscal year 2021 budget projections and proposed fiscal year 21 capital projects as contained in the Finance Committee motion to Article 10 of the 2020 annual town meeting warrant with respect to COVID-19 pandemic costs and impacts. Take it away, Brian.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I believe that Rebecca had sent you all a list of everything that was being projected to be funded by free cash in Article 10 of for the 2020 annual town meeting. The reason that we had sent that to you is that in the beginning, as we're reviewing fiscal 21 projections, we're projecting decreases in the 5 largest local estimated receipt categories, being rooms, meals, plumbing, wiring, and building inspections. At this juncture, we're anticipating approximately a 30% decrease in the budgeted amounts for those. And a couple other line items, we're projecting a smaller amount in investment income as well in the general fund. So all told, that represents approximately a $2 million decrease in revenue that would be available in fiscal 21. So I've talked to the town manager and presented one plan. There's probably more options, but one option that we have presented, which is why we're here to discuss with you today, is that we would like to be able to consider or are considering removing all capital projects funded by free cash from the warrant to conserve that money to potentially fill any plug any holes within the general fund operating budget. The reason that we're proposing this or considering this is because if we feel that it's one time, it would fall within our financial policies, which dictate that if there are a catastrophic event, that one option that we would have to maintain operations would be to redeploy free cash to those areas to maintain the continuity of the operations. We're also proposing this because we're continuing a review of both solid waste and our island home. And while appear to be on stable footing right now. We're still awaiting guidance from DOR on how they're going to look at calculating local estimated receipts for next year. And that typically they do allow us to go up to what we've collected on an annual basis from the prior year. But given the fact that the governor has essentially a stay-at-home order, which has shut down all non-essential businesses, solid waste may be more impacted than our Island home in terms of the revenues that they're collecting now. So we are proposing this to give us the flexibility to manage through any of the challenges that may come up as a result of the pandemic and the shutdown of operations. And one thing that I should note is we have had a discussion. I've discussed it with the school. We've had a discussion with the DPW director, with the IT director, who are all on the in the meeting as well. They're prioritizing the lists of their projects so that in the event that we do not need to use all of the free cash, and hopefully that will be the case, we would be able to selectively potentially reallocate that back to projects. We're also undertaking at the same time a complete final review of all the open projects that may have monies that could be reallocated from one capital project to another. And if there's available funding there, the prioritization by the individuals on the meeting at the same with us here will certainly help us make those decisions and direct that any other reappropriations that we may be able to do.
Brian, this is Richard Huzzy. Just a quick question on unintended consequences. I'm sure you've looked at everything, and the department heads have as well. On the list, are there any items that jump out as perhaps being problematic in terms of unintended consequences?
Well, I think that I don't want to say unintended consequences. Certainly when we're potentially pulling back $5 million worth of capital, when we've all acknowledged that we need to be moving forward and maintaining an infrastructure and the things that are on that list. I think that we'd ideally like to do them all. I think that there's, in consultation with all of the department heads that are on the call, ideally they would love to be able to continue, but they understand the situation, and which is why we've asked for the prioritization list to do it. But I don't think the town won't come to a grinding halt tomorrow if we didn't do these projects, but they're ideally we would need to get them done at a point in the future.
Can I add a little bit to that? I'm just looking through them, and Richard, that's a very good question. I don't know if there are severe unanticipated consequences like Brian is just saying. There are some things that may happen. There are some vehicle replacements that are going to have to wait. That might mean a little more maintenance of the existing vehicles. There are things like the costs associated with, no, that's not a free cash one, sorry. There are some facilities work. So it's possible that some of that will have to be a bit delayed, although there are existing funds to do some of that work, which we have not finished yet for those projects. There may be, there's $1 million for roadway work. We'll have to use the funds we have now, and there are some funds that supplement that. So we're going to have to do a little prioritization of some of these things that are annual items. And again, we do still have some funds available to do some of this, but I guess I would echo what Brian said. I don't think there's anything in here that is going to bring us to a grinding halt. There may be a few things that get delayed, but I don't think they're life-threatening.
Thank you, Libby. Yes, any other comments from any other school departments on possible projects might be impacted? Or Peter, you have a question?
Yes, Peter, through the chair. Brian or Libby, when you look at your 30% reduction in your revenues based on rooms and meals, are you taking that through the end of June fiscal 20, or are you starting July 1 fiscal 21?
So that's a really good question. for fiscal 20, we've received the first 2 quarters being payments in September or December are the largest transactional payments in rooms and meals.
Yeah.
So in terms of an answer to your question about fiscal 20, the only period that I don't believe we will collect anything or very minimal would be the last payment which is in June. So we've already exceeded the budget for fiscal 20 with relative to rooms and meals. So the 30% reduction that we're discussing currently is a projection on what's going to happen in fiscal 20 based on the number that we had put in the budget, or fiscal 21, excuse me, that we had put in the budget.
Is that of course, a question that probably has 1,000 answers. Is that your best judgment, a 30% reduction? Do you have any backup plans for that to go even higher as a percentage point?
Well, it's the initial starting point based on some conversations with what people are doing what people are projecting on the Cape. And I've done an analysis which shows what every 10% increase or reduction would be in terms of a dollar reduction to the budget. I will tell you that when the high point before the last recession in 2006 on a full year basis versus when most people would anticipate that we did come out of the recession and started in 2008 being 2010, there was a 28% reduction in rooms tax receipts from 2006 to 2010. So I don't think any catastrophic event perfectly matches what has happened prior, but using that as a benchmark, it was kind of the starting point too, based on our own data here. So obviously, as we continue to refine this and we continue to have discussions, we are expecting DOR may even provide additional guidance on how they would expect communities to handle it as well. But in the discussion, we've laid out what every 10% change would be.
So it looks like, I mean, that is a very optimistic 30%, but it also looks like your free cash and cap can afford, much larger than a $2 million dip in your revenue. So I think that's a good thing. Just a question maybe more related towards FinCom, and it is an enterprise fund. What about the airport? I mean, the airport, from my perspective, seems to me that it would probably take the biggest whack relevant to its fuel or lack thereof fuel sales. Any comment on that, or is that for another meeting?
I can give you a general comment right now to tell you that I'm working very closely with the finance individual at the airport for us to clearly understand what the impact to their operations is going to be and what that looks like. And the manager and I have had preliminary discussions, but I don't know that I'm prepared to produce any concrete information for you right this minute.
For me, that's much more concerning probably than Capcom projects. Mm-hmm. Those are all great things you can easily put on hold and wait to buy, depending on how the fallout falls out. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Any other questions, comments, insights?
Can I make a little clarification to something I said? So I don't know if you want to go through these projects, but there are a couple that we would keep. There's a boiler for the school, and there's a couple things, at least one thing, maybe more for IT. But pretty much, I think, Brian, correct me, everything else that would be funded through free cash in Article 10 would be deferred.
That's correct. The one thing to mention about the boiler is that we have found alternate. We believe we can use the way the borrowing article was written for the intermediate school. Yeah. It allows for renovations and repairs to other buildings. So we're going to use that language to fund that.
Okay.
So just so the committee knows, with respect to this whole overall situation with the budget, we have a meeting with FinCom this afternoon at 2 to review some of the same stuff with them. And we're hoping that by next week we can bring to the board a kind of a status of where we think we are with fiscal 20 and 21 with the projections that Brian mentioned and what some of the approaches are, or the approaches that we've identified as being able to fill the gap going into 21. We don't think 20 is really going to be an issue. So just FYI, we wanted to be able to consult with the Capcom and the FinCom before we went to the board, see if you all had any other thoughts or input. And then we'll start this conversation with the board again, hopefully at its meeting next week on the 22nd. So we can start preparing for any cuts that we're going to need to be making or considering anyway, going into or during 21. Also, just a little update about town meeting. Oh, sorry, Jason.
It's okay. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say about town meeting. Right now, I think you probably all know, it's been rescheduled to Saturday, May 30th. That is probably, I can't say it's written in stone right now. It may change, and we're having some discussion, probably again, more discussion with the board as it's meeting next week about whether or not we ought to even have 2020 annual town meeting before June 30th. It could potentially, maybe an option would be for us to basically have it in the fall, or we could possibly work to shorten it up in fiscal 20 so that we only get to the critical items, and other things that aren't so critical could be potentially put off. That would require some voluntary compliance with people like citizen article sponsors. So just so you know, we're going to be having this discussion more with the board at its meeting next week.
Thank you for the update. Any comments?
Yeah, I have one. I just to overview, to think through this in a way, just correct me if I'm wrong, Libby and Brian, because we had this free cash, we're in a good position to not have these capital projects versus if we had no free cash and we did on these projects, that 2 million shortfall would be coming out of places, would be coming out of services and another place, right? It would be more difficult.
Definitely more difficult, way more difficult. Brian, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I'm not asking to get a narrative to explain to the public how we're in a, not that I need to be super positive about it, but I think somebody said earlier, maybe it was Peter, that these projects can come back and they can be reappropriated if things go well, but we're not dipping into operating and laying people off, things like that at this moment.
I would say that with the measures that Brian has been able to put in place for us, we're in a good financial position right now, which is why we have a good solid bond rating, at least for now. And we've been able to position ourselves so that if we were to run into a problem like now, we can weather it. I'm not going to say easily, but we can weather it in a way that hopefully does not bring us to a grinding halt and require lots of austerity measure types of things.
I have one more question, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
Brian, when you said that 30% decrease was rooms and meals, was that included the short-term rental tax, or is that a whole separate thing we're thinking about because we don't have any history of knowing?
No, so the rooms tax is all encompassing lodging establishments and
Okay.
short-term rental. It's everything. So
Okay.
that 30% is that 30% reduction that we're talking about is on all of it as a whole.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. Just one question I had looking through this list. Is any of this funding related to a project that's currently in progress that might be, kind of halted mid completion, mid stage? I mean, I'm thinking, for instance, the sidewalk reconstruction caught my eye. I've seen a couple sidewalks downtown that, work started, it stopped. When things open back up, I mean, none of this funding is going to keep those from being completed, since the idea would be that funding was already, prior in place and still available to complete those. And this money would have been appropriated for a next new phase. Brian, maybe you can answer that.
There's nothing in that funding that the sidewalk that you're referring to is actually a borrowing. So that's independent of this. So,
It's already there.
yeah, there's nothing really in here that is a supplemental appropriation to a project that would delay that project.
Great.
There's continuations of things, but they wouldn't necessarily stop anything at that point.
Yeah, mid phase or anything. Great, thanks. Let's see. Anybody else out there? Comments, follow-ups?
Mr. Chairman, Rob McNeil.
Rob.
Just wanted to point out that on that same point, the permanent traffic data collection stations, free cash slated for 116,000 was in fact supplemental funding to be able to sign the contract that we have put out the bid. So that's basically pending signature, and that funding would jeopardize that project. But other than that, nothing else is ultimately pending.
So contract pending, awaiting signature for the 116. And is the consensus that we're going to hold off on that and not execute that contract?
Well, again, we're
More to come.
We've recommended, that we're willing to work with finance and the town manager's office to forego the free cash. But if we were to select a project, that would be the #1 priority for that reason.
Gotcha. And I guess that begs the question: Are there any other projects that are? Sorry, I'm getting some feedback here. Any other projects that we currently have, some kind of subsidy or some kind of time-based discount or other funds available, that might sway our decision one way or the other? I mean, obviously, if we need to save the cash, we need to save the cash. But like to Rob's point, if there's something already in process where we're getting a government subsidy or something along those lines, are there any that people know from their respective departments that fall into that category?
Mr. Chairman, Rob McNeil, one more time. I would say, Rob. We've explored alternatives and we do have funds available in our island-wide roadway repairs, for instance, in fiscal 20, that could pay for that as opposed to, wait for the free cash appropriation. So we do have an alternative to that.
Okay, I'm sure Brian will make note of that. Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Michael.
Superintendent of Schools, Michael Kozort. I raised a concern in an earlier meeting with admin, and I think we all recognize that given the existing situation with remote learning and remote working, one of the challenges is going to be maintaining technology or strengthening technology infrastructure should this continue or should it happen again. So that is something that we should all be looking at in all departments as we look at these cuts.
Very good point. That will be crucial going forward if we continue to have to do remote learning from home learning. That's a good point. Any other takers, members, department heads?
I have one question, Mr.
Jason,
Chair.
yes, please.
Any projects that passed in FY20 that will be on hold, even though we have the authorization to borrow? Is there anything that Brian, our town admin, wants to hold off on for a while that was maybe going to be bid out this fall or summer, maybe?
I don't want to speak for the town manager, but from my perspective, anything that's authorized to borrow, if it was to continue, we would most likely just take the bans for a little bit longer time to see how this impacted before we permanently borrowed, because under the statute with bans, we could roll them for up to 10 years. Not that I would ever do that, but we have that flexibility. So if there was a project that, say, just use for an example, the sidewalk reconstruction plan that we have, those are all authorized by borrowings that we try to time to the most advantageous time in the interest rate market, but also in terms of when we would add it to the budget for the debt service. So depending on how the economy comes out of this, the only thing from my perspective, from a financing perspective, is we may just take the bans out for a slightly longer period of time before we rolled it into the budget and into the operational cost. But I don't want to speak to the prioritization, but from the financing standpoint, that's how I would manage those. Just potentially take the bans out a little bit longer.
Brian. Want to recognize Christy Kickham joining the meeting. Hello, Christy. Christy. Well, let the minute show, as well as Martin. Thanks for joining, Martin. I don't know if I caught you at the beginning. Thank you.
Hi, everyone.
Okay. Anybody else? Doesn't look like we have much left on the agenda, so I'm gonna open it up to public comments, anything that came in, or any other insights or topics from any other department heads, staff, anybody?
I don't have a comment to make, and I just wanted to, there's been no comments in the YouTube video either.
Public comment. I told Nat to public comment if he had anything to say, but I don't know if you figured that out either.
Nothing has come through, at least from what I can see.
He must not be watching then.
He said he's watching, so watch out. Yeah. Okay. Does not look. Oh, yeah, Richard.
Peter, do you need a motion to approve? Are you at that point?
Approve our next steps. I guess Libby going to finance committee to discuss these. Is that what we're?
Yeah, I don't think we're really asking you to necessarily approve anything.
Right.
Just give input or thoughts or ideas about anything that we haven't mentioned or maybe thought about. Jason brought up a good one. And we thought about that a bit, but we haven't really listed out the fiscal 20 thing, so we need to do that. So I don't think we need necessarily official action, but we just wanted to really make sure that we consulted with you all before we go to FinCom and take something.
Certainly, I'm assuming we'll take a vote on any actions or any projects or final decisions that are made at that time, but at this point, it seems more informational just to get everybody kind of on the same foundation as we move forward. Yes, Jason.
We might have already addressed this, but if we're taking a lot of these things off, is any of these items on the ballot, and how do we? The ballot's the ballot, right? So we're not taking anything off. It's kind of set in stone, regardless of when the election is, right?
The items that we're talking about for now are only in Article 10. The standalones that are on the ballot are separate articles. Okay. Which we haven't really, so yes, you're right. They're on the ballot already. And that's probably going to be a board discussion at some point. What do we just proceed? I mean, they're on the ballot, so I don't think we're going to print a new one.
Right.
So we're going to have to figure it out for town meeting though.
In that case, will we get updated recommendations on the floor from select board, FinCom?
Hopefully we will get to a point where we know when town meeting will be, and in the weeks preceding that, there will be updated motions that will need to be made. We're going to need an updated one potentially for Article 8. Maybe there are others that we might need. But yeah, the Capcom will be in on that.
Good question, Jason. Thank you. Peter.
Just not to be redundant, Brian, but I think it's probably smart to say that you could probably fund up to a 60, maybe 55 or 60% reduction in those revenues based on what money you're leaving on the table for the capital projects. Obviously, assuming that it's not going to be the 5.9 that's there. Do you have any indication of what you're thinking of keeping of that free cash? Is it 5 million? Is it 5.2? What's your thoughts?
On what I'm going to keep in terms of how much I'm not going to spend?
Yes.
Well, hopefully we don't have to use very much of it. But I think that the two biggest unknowns really, I think one of them you hit on, which we're working with them on, is the airport. That probably is one of the largest unknowns. And if there was anything that needed to be done, it most likely would have to come from free cash.
Okay.
And then the other one really is solid waste, is most likely the other enterprise fund that may need some additional help, only from the perspective of what they're generating or collecting in revenues right now is going to be is more than likely going to be less than they brought in last year. And we may have to fill some gap in 21 and or 20 with that as we cycle through that. So I think the other logical question then becomes is how much are we gonna, how much free cash is going to be problematic for the rating agencies. I mean, as I've said before, again, I think that our plan always has been that if we got into a catastrophic situation, we've always been very clear with them that one of the first things we would redeploy is any available reserves to do that. And obviously free cash is a reserve. So I think that they would expect this to be done regardless of the level. But, I think that as the town manager mentioned, we're working on recommendations, and this is one of the tools. And it really, some of it depends on how the other enterprises are how we think they're gonna end up, which is where we're really trying to focus our efforts on right now as well. We've had constant contact with DOR about the general fund just to make sure that we were thinking things through clearly and the way they're gonna look at them. So overall, I think the general fund is going to be okay for fiscal 20. So we don't think we'd need any of that 5.9 potentially to fund or cover anything in the general fund. It's more going to be the enterprise funds. So I guess I would say that I would project that we potentially, depending on the outcome, would need 5.9, but I hope that the number is substantially lower so that we would be able to potentially reallocate some money back to capital projects.
As a person who operates a business, is this a yes or no answer? Have you forecasted a 90 to 100% loss net revenue? It's just a spitball budget.
I know what it would look like. I haven't put pen to paper though.
Okay, thank you. It's the rainy day fund. It's raining out. That's for gosh darn sure.
It's maybe closer to a downpour.
Yeah. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you, Peter. Let's see around the room. Yes, Christy, welcome. You're on mute. Oh, Christy, you're on mute. Christy, welcome.
You got me?
Yep.
All right. Brian, I was just curious if there was a pulse on the cost of services going forward, considering there might be high demand for people's service. And so I didn't know if any of these items would change in cost due to, the high impact of workers getting back to work and high demand for those services.
I think that when you look at the list, obviously any equipment that would have been in there is, if there is any. I think that is certainly something that we would look at, given that a lot of it is building. So I'm sure that the cost is going to go up. But when we allocate the money, you have to remember that our cost of service is generally higher than you would normally cost a homeowner do in any way because of prevailing wage and bonding potentially and or bid requirements. So I think that there is the potential for, a slightly higher cost, which may impact us into the future. What that looks like, I don't know what the pent up demand is going to be. The thing that we have that's a little bit different is that not a lot of the on-island contractors actually bid on a lot of the work that we have. So a lot of it is from off-island contractors, and I'm sure there'll be pent up demand that we're going to be competing with and may end up costing us a little bit. What that actual number looks like, I don't know that I could put a number on it right now, Christy.
All right.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Christy. Let's see. Any other comments or questions? We have it. Okay, seeing none, I guess final chance on public comments. Alexandria, Jason, anything popping up?
Nothing. Nothing's come up on our YouTube video.
Okay. For our abbreviated agenda, I believe that was really the only item to speak of. So I guess with that being said, can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Second? Second, yeah, got a second?
A second, yeah.
Yes, second.
Second, yes, okay. Richard? Richard, yes?
That was a second, yes.
Yes, okay, vote. Can I get a roll call vote? Richard Hussey? Yes. Peter McEachern, yes.
Yes.
Jason Bridges, yes.
Yes.
All right, sounds like we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Right.
Thank
Good seeing
you.
everyone.
Thank you.
Stay safe, happy, healthy.
Thank you.
Thank you,
We'll get
Peter.
you those triple P loans, promise. Coming your way.